A very good evening. As always, it's time for the press preview. It's a first look at what is on Sunday's front pages. And tonight we'll be checking out the headlines with Amy Nickell-Turner and Anita Boateng. Very good evening to you both. We will take a look at the front pages, first of all, for you, though, starting with The Observer. We've given up the fight. The Observer quotes Tories as poll defeats loom. The Housing Secretary, Michael Gove, warns that democracy is in danger if the young can't get houses. That's the front of the Sunday Times. Let's bring in the Telegraph. It covers Defence Secretary Grant Shapps' order to review the diversity and inclusivity policy at the Ministry of Defence. The Mail has an exclusive story on Buckingham Palace's reaction to the sale of fake books about the King's cancer diagnoses, while the Mirror covers the King's message of gratitude for the outpouring of public support. And the Daily Star reports on Model Abby Clancy's close call with 3 UFOs while driving on the A3. Can you imagine? And don't forget, just scan that QR code you see on screen during the programme. You can have a look at the front pages of all of tomorrow's papers while you watch us discussing them. And to do that, Amy and Anita, great to see you both. Very good evening. Let's start then with this message from the King. We just heard about it at 10 o'clock this evening. The front of the Sunday Telegraph, Anita. King takes great comfort from support of the nation.
Yes, so we've got a statement from the King, kind of his first since the announcement of the palace that he was undergoing treatment for cancer. We don't know the nature of the cancer that he has, but he sent this kind of wonderful message speaking of his heartfelt thanks for the outpouring of support that he's received. And it kind of goes through some of the key things that he said, which is obviously his most helpful thanks. And he talks particularly about those who've been affected by cancer and talks about how these kind of kind thoughts mean a lot. So it feels like he's really connecting with not just the fact that he's going through cancer, but the millions of people in this country and their loved ones who have experienced this. And I think that one interesting element of this story is that the NHS has reported a significant increase in people looking up the symptoms of cancer. So raising awareness, getting people to get checked out, particularly men who tend to go to the GP less on these issues. Actually, this could be a really important moment for the conversation about how we deal with cancer in the UK.
Yeah, really interesting. As a man of a certain age, you know, people have been having conversations with me, friends and colleagues, and I think it has started a debate.
Oh, definitely. And one of the quotes is King Charles has said, it's heartening to hear how my diagnosis has helped promote understanding. However, it's one thing being diagnosed or going to the doctor, but unfortunately, the way things are at the moment, I think this also needs to start a conversation about the woeful cancer care that the UK is offering. We currently have the waiting list, which are the longest on record. That is a shocking statistic. So while, of course, we all wish King Charles a speedy recovery and our thoughts are, of course, with him, I think they're also with the 1 in 2 people who will be diagnosed with cancer and are currently looking at a 12-week wait before their first appointment even. There's also been news today of an increase in people opting for private cancer care as a last resort because they just can't they can't depend on the NHS. And of course, the King isn't depending on the NHS. I don't necessarily think he should, but I think it starts a conversation about why is it the case that an ordinary person wouldn't have the same care as has been on offer to King Charles.
Yeah, I think the frustration is that actually when you get to receive the care, it can be very good, can't it? It's just the problem of getting it and those waiting lists.
Yes, and I think this is something that, you know, when you think about the NHS strikes, when you think about, you know, whether it's the junior doctors, consultants, all of the disruption that's happened as a result of COVID, all the ways in which, you know, the infrastructure of the NHS has really been tested over the past couple of years. It's hard to be completely optimistic about how the country is going to get to a situation where, you know, the kind of Rolls-Royce treatment that you can receive on the NHS is delivered as standard. And I think that's one of the challenges that really doesn't really go away, even when you fix some of the challenges around funding. So this is much more fundamental than that, particularly as we get into an ageing population where we do see, sadly, more occurrences of cancers.
Yeah. OK, well, let's stay with the King's health, because the Mail on Sunday has a shocking story on its front. The Palace calls in lawyers over bogus AI books on the King's cancer. Amy, a number of books have been found for sale online that have come out in the last few days, clearly not written by legitimate authors, but by AI and on sale.
Yeah, so this is quite fascinating, really. So there's a rise in Amazon self-publishing feature when it comes to books, and there's no real way of telling whether it is written by AI or written by an actual author. And I think the problem here is people are so interested in finding out exactly the type of cancer that King Charles has. It brings up that question, doesn't it? Is it of public interest, or is it just interesting to the public? AI has obviously decided that it will be profitable to try and put this out there, and people are searching for it. So it's getting a lot of airtime. But I think it's kind of ironically that the Mail would run this story when they've had a live ticker on their website of every single utterance, detail, tiny little fart about King Charles's diagnosis since it started. Because, well, yeah, there is a lot of intrigue into this story, and they're not helping that.
I suppose the point is that people are making money out of the King's illness and doing it in a pretty distasteful way.
Yes, I think so. And actually, this has been a real problem for a lot of authors for quite a while, since there were some stories about it last year, with several authors finding out that actually money had been made through these books with their names on them, you know, published authors with these weird, odd AI stories purporting to be biographies, all sorts of things. And it really is going to continue to be a problem. And, you know, Amazon obviously wants to encourage self-publishing. You want authors to be able to kind of make their mark in a way that they know how, even without a publishing deal. But fundamentally, this does serve to continue to undermine trust in information that we receive, which is ultimately very, very damaging to almost, honestly, the fabric of society. Coming into an election year where we're going to see more and more potential AI-generated fake news or broader fake news, I think it really does skew the public discourse in a way that's quite troubling.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And talking of elections, let's move on to the front of the Observer. We've given up the fight, Amy, say the Tories, as poll defeat looms. Fill us in on this.
Right, so the Observer headline reckons that Conservative MPs have admitted defeat, and they're already speaking about another change of leadership, potentially. And it's quoted that the Tory party is in a death spiral. Now, for me, I think the Tory party are in a situation of reputation preservation right now. And I think stories like this just highlight what has become of them, which is a bit looking like rats in a sack. Because talking about a change of leadership at the moment, for me, highlights how inward they look. They look at their party rather than the actual implications of their policy and where they could go with that. Their leader isn't the problem, and he hasn't been the problem for the last however long. It's the party. The party is the problem. And I think it's that age-old thing, is your life better now than it was under Labour in 2010? And I don't think many people, apart from maybe the mega rich, can look around and say, yes, my life is better now.
Anita, by-elections this week as well.
Yes.
Coming up.
In Wellingborough and Kingswood. And so it's interesting that, that, Amy, you talk about leadership, because actually there isn't a single thing about leadership in this story. It talks about this prediction that there's going to be fresh attacks on Sunak's leadership, and I can't even see any quotes about that. It's mostly about the fact that, like, these two by-elections are going to be really challenging, and it says, for instance, that the Sunak allies have said that they've timed this in recess to reduce the kind of parliamentary chatter and unnerve. I think fundamentally there's no denying the challenge that the Conservative Party as a whole faces, but it sort of feels more like here, you know, journalists in hunt of a story rather than anything new here that suggests there is going to be any fresh challenges to his leadership,
well, you're
for
right,
instance.
but it says anti-Sunak chatter and plotting in quotes, and we do know that Kemi Badenoch had a group called Evil Plotters, so it's not out of the question that there is some truth to this story, because every time something goes wrong, particularly certain factions of the Conservative Party seem to say it's nothing to do with us, we just need a new leader.
Sorry, there's one person that's publicly said that, one MP. So I don't buy that. And I also think that people have funny WhatsApp group titles all the time. And I think we're slightly, as Westminster, guilty of reading into this what we want to happen because it will all be very sensationalist rather than reflecting the reality of what's happening.
OK, listen, we've just got 1 minute, so let's squeeze one more story in. It's on the front of the Telegraph again. Migrants dupe church leaders to avoid deportation, say judges. Amy, Abdul Azadi isn't mentioned certainly in the article on the front page. But, of course, we hear that he converted to Christianity in order to win his appeal to stay in the UK. Is this related to that?
Yeah, and last week we also saw the 7 migrants on the Billy Stockholm barge suddenly saying they wanted to be baptised. And some people believe that that has led to bolstering their asylum claims. The headline here is migrants dupe church leaders to avoid deportation. However, the ultimate decision with any deportation or any asylum claim falls to the Home Office. So I can't see how it's the church's job to interrogate asylum seekers. I think it's the church's job to be there to support vulnerable people and provide whatever they can in that regard. And then it's up to the Home Office to interrogate what the church has, what they've gone through with the church. So I think this is potentially what I've seen a lot of is trying to pass the buck on these asylum decisions to a third party rather than where the responsibility lies, which is within the Home Office.
OK, we're out of time. We will chat again in a couple of minutes after this short break. Don't go away. Hello again, welcome back. Part 2 of the press preview. Amy and Anita are still with me in the studio. Anita, let's turn our attention to the front of the Observer once again. We've been running a story all day today about parents turning to unregulated education because children with special educational needs are simply being turned away from schools. And this article is quite interesting, isn't it? Schools across England warning they'll soon be unsafe because they're having to cut teachers and support staff to save money, and record numbers of them are now in debt. Yes,
I think it's another dimension to the story that you've been running all day, which is, fascinating about the ways in which, teaching and pupils are really kind of suffering again, post-COVID in particular, where absenteeism, for instance, kind of rose enormously, mental health challenges amongst 9 to 12-year-olds, almost trebled. Like, there's some really dramatic statistics when you look at this. So the Observer focuses particularly on a warning that schools might be unsafe because they have to cut the number of teachers and, crucially, support staff. So it references the fact that a lot of 1 in 8 local council authorities were in deficit in 2022-2023, which is the highest on record since schools took charge of their own funding in 1999. And that's when schools are starting to get increasingly anxious. And really what's fascinating about this story is that education, as much as it's one thing that if you talk to the public, that's what first comes to mind when you think about what government does, education really hasn't been at the forefront of conversation as much as you might expect, given the levels of challenges that are being faced in schools right now.
Yeah, how do we fix this, Amy?
Well, there's been massive recruitment and retention problems in schools for years now. I think we fix this by looking after teachers and acknowledging that they're one of the most important jobs in society, a bit like they do in, say, somewhere like Finland, where you have to have a master's degree. You're one of the most respected jobs in society. You're paid really well. We don't have that respect for teachers, and I think that's got worse since COVID, particularly the parent-teacher relationship. I think a lot of parents now, they think, well, I can do that at home because I did during COVID. So we need to raise the morale and actually respect our teachers. I think that could start with a bit of a pay rise. But the National Education Union, they've said these numbers are only going to get worse. So it's a really scary time for schools. Like Anita said, with the record absences from kids, which obviously won't be helped. Their teachers are chopping and changing. There was a mention in this piece about the support staff being cut, and teachers need that. They need that in schools. So I think, the kids have been through so much. That 2.5 years of COVID affected children so much. I have a 9-year-old son. His reading was really impacted. 2 years is a long time in a kid's life. So this is sad to see.
Yeah,
and I hope
Still facing the
particularly
consequences
when the
of that.
schools are crumbling like aero bars at the same time.
Yeah. A lot to deal with. You can read more about that in The Observer. On the front of the Sunday Times, from education to housing, Anita, Michael Gove is writing in the Times, warning that democracy is in danger if the young can't get on the housing ladder.
Yes, and Michael Gove is expected to be out on the airways tomorrow talking about an announcement around housing, perhaps. So this is presumably an interview that ties into that. So there's something really profound in this, actually. He talks about the fact that if young people feel like markets are rigged, then you get an increasing number of young people saying, I don't believe in democracy, I don't believe in markets. And this is in reference to a study that came out in September of last year, if I'm not incorrect, there was a global poll that showed that actually like 18 to 35-year-olds are much more likely to sort of support military rule and authoritarianism. There's an interesting strain. It's not just happening in the UK, it's happening in the US too. But this question around what is a promise of democracy? What is a promise of opportunity? When we see the fact that 18 to 35-year-olds, the most common living arrangement now is living with parents, you start to see how some of that generational breakdown starts to really manifest and present itself in really unpredictable ways, not just in the kinds of things you might expect, like the fact that you have fewer people having children, for instance, at younger ages, but also their belief in democracy for delivering the kinds of opportunities they want. So this is a really important story, and it kind of runs through some of the options that are being explored by the government to really mark a shift in the kinds of access to housing that young people might be able to have in the future.
And the Tories are worried about the under-40s, aren't they? About young people, that they're losing them all.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this is a bit more like that old arsonist coming to put out the fire type situation, because, I mean, Michael Gove here, he sort of blames NIMBYs, but is it not just a severe lack of house building, selling off the housing supply, the housing stock, and not replenishing it? Is it not more simple? Is it not to do with that? I don't know. I think that fundamentally we didn't build enough, this government didn't build enough houses